Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Saturday class with some prayers first. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhurbhavaswa, Tatsavitra Vargo Devasya Dhimahi, Diyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. अस्तो मा सत्यमया तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमया मृत्युर्मा अमृतं गमया ओम सहनावतु सहना भुनक्तु सवीर्यं कर्वावै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति शांति शांति. So Yog Darshan written by Rishi Patanjali. And it's written in the sutra form, not in the shlok form or the mantra form. Okay, sutra form. So it has 4 chapters and we are on chapter 2 and verse number 13. We started going through it. So let's look at it, what Rishi Patanjali is saying over here. Because in this verse, he talks about the karmas and the mind that houses the karmas. And sometimes that mind, that part of mind, which is called chitta, it could be in a very dense field of avidya. That's why we go through the knowledge. That's why we go through the sadhana. So there's more and more light, so that we can see what it is. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What do we need to do over there? So in verse number 13, he says, Sati mule tad vipakaha jati ayu bhoga. As long as the root continues to exist, and root is avidya, that must have an effect, forcing us to be born into a particular species, live for a particular span of time, and undergo inescapable experiences of pleasure and pain. So as long as the root is there will be sapling or the trees, and once the tree is there, flowers and fruits and seeds again. So this is what he is telling us, as long as the root continues to exist. And root is in the karmashya. And we learned last time that there are 2 kinds of karmashya. 2 colors to a karmashya, actually, you can say, not 2 separate karmashya, but we can call it punya or papa. Because majority of our actions are neither 100% good nor terribly bad. They are mixture of likes and dislikes, clarity and confusion. That's why our actions could be mildly positive or negative, mildly good or bad. So actions performed under the influence of intense ignorance, they are intensely bad. On the other hand, when they are under the influence of intense wisdom, they are predominantly positive. So this word sati over here, the very first word in this sutra, he is reiterating the previous sutra with this word sati. He is reminding us that even though actions are housed in the realm of the mind, they are born and nurtured in the realm of the afflictions. Avidya, asmita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh. those fivefold afflictions. So as long as karmas and their karmashya remain connected to their root, there is no hope of freedom from the bondage of karma. Sooner or later, the doer must face his deeds. This is called the inevitable law of karma. And Patanjali is telling us in this sutra exactly how our action mature, how they come back to the doers, and what makes the doers so powerless that they cannot escape the consequences of their deeds. So the explanation is very simple. Due to ignorance, that is avidya, we identify ourselves with our actions. We become attached to the fruits of our actions. We become firmly established in aversion, dvesh, to a contrary outcome. And fear of being unable to achieve and secure the fruits of our actions and fear of losing what we have achieved really fills our consciousness. So not only the actions, the storehouse of the actions, fruits of our actions, and also the ignorance, mistaken identity, attachment, aversion, and fear become an integral part of us. And all of these force, they shape our lives. So if we don't discharge our karmas before we die, they force us to come back to this world. So karmas stored in the karmashya seek expression through our rebirth. So through rebirth, we seek freedom from the bondage of our karmas through their fruition. Karmas, they seek freedom from us. But as long as our karmashya is connected to its roots, the field of fivefold afflictions, this freedom is merely a dream. This is what Rishi Patanjali is telling us. If we want to learn how to discharge our karmas, we got to do the sadhana. Because otherwise, this natural law of karma is helping us discharging our karmas by placing us in a cycle of birth and rebirth. But we forget why we are here. Instead of finishing those karmas, we accumulate more karmas because of this ignorance. So this is the lot of souls with unfinished karmas. And this is a story of majority of us. So three factors are totally dependent upon our previous karmas. This is what Rishi Patanjali is saying. What are those three? Jati, Ayu, and Bhog. Jati means species. Okay, animal, plant, reptile, birds, or even he is referring to the humans. Different race or a different place. That's all jati. Ayu means lifespan. How long we're going to live? It's all dependent upon our karmas. Bhog means experiencing by consuming or being consumed by experiencing. That is bhog, pleasure or pain. So what he's saying that our karmas determine when, where, how, and which particular species, race, place will be born. This places a general parameter around how long we will live in that body. And what could be the general course of experience while living in that body? No matter in what species we are born and where and how we are born, our experience will inevitably be a mixture of pleasure and pain. We see the dogs and the cats also living a luxurious life these days. And on the other hand, some human beings don't. So even those blessed with large measures of happiness and good fortune have their moments of sorrow and misfortunes. Why this is so is the subject of the next sutra. Sutra number 14. Te hlada paritap fal punya apunya hetutvat. Te means they. So they means the three effects of past actions, which he mentioned in the previous verse. Birth in a particular species, lifespan, and inescapable experiences during that lifespan. Jati, Ayu, Bhog, remember that. That is they. See, every sutra is connected with the previous sutra and the next sutra. So te means they, halad, pleasant, joyful, or favorable. Halad. Paritap, pain, sorrow. It's like a scorching. Fal is the fruit. So together, hlada paritap phala means the one whose overall effect is a mixture of both pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. Hlada paritap. Okay, so sometimes happiness, so sometimes sorrow. Punya means virtue, uplifting actions, meritorious actions. Apunya, opposite of that, degrading actions or vices. Hetutvat, due to being the cause. So due to the fact that merits and demerits are the actual cause. Punya, apunya. That's why we were told ever since we were little, do punya kara. Punya kara. Stay away from the apunya. So they are, so jati, ayu, bhog, they are accompanied by pleasure and pain because they are rooted in punya and apunya karam. So the cycle of pleasure and pain. So cycle of pleasure and pain is we are the one who sowed those seeds. So the species in which we are born, how long we live in that body, and what kind of experiences will walk into our life are totally dependent upon our previous karmas. Here Rishi Patanjali is explaining why our every experience is an inexorable mixture of pleasure and pain. Because we know that there's an anxiety involved in acquiring the objects of pleasure. And that anxiety becomes painful when we become fearful of losing the objects one required. And the fear is painful. So anxiety of acquiring was pleasurable. Fear of losing becomes painful. And even if we are lucky enough to be free of anxiety and fear, the experience of pleasure is inevitably comes to an end. The desire for pleasure does not cease. We want to hold on to the pleasure. But inability to hold that pleasure becomes pain. And the desire for sustained fulfillment makes us restlessness. And that is also painful. However, no pain or pleasure or painful experience lasts forever, because they go hand in hand, pain and pleasure, pain and pleasure. We meet somebody we wanted to meet, there's a pleasure. But when that person is leaving, there's a pain. And this is the subject of the sutra. Remember, the mind is the prime reason we perform actions. Why? Because mind is filled with all kinds of desires. Some desires are auspicious, while others are not. But we want to fulfill our desires by performing the actions. And the quality of our desires determine the quality of both our actions and the fruits of our actions. And you will agree with me that most of us do not have a perfectly clear, calm, and tranquil mind, nor are we established in our pure self all the time. That is why our actions and the fruits of our actions are always a mixture of good and bad, right and wrong, pleasure and pain. So this duality. There are many, many stories in the scriptures, in the Purans especially. There is a very common story about Rishi Vyasa. He saw a caterpillar frantically trying to cross the road. And Rishi Vyas, being a yogi, being an avatar, he could talk to the animals. This is one of the siddhis. He had that siddhi. He asked the caterpillar why he was in such a hurry. The creature replied, "Don't you hear the noise? Can't you feel the earth shaking? Something is coming our way. I can hear the troops, chariots, elephants marching on the road. And if I do not run away, I will be crushed." Rishi Vyas said, "What is so precious in your life that you're afraid of losing it?" Caterpillar said, "Are you crazy? What is more precious than life itself?" Rishi Vyas understood the poor creature was afraid of dying. Then he introduced himself and he said, "I can help you. Let me first give you the ability to see your past. Right now you are in a caterpillar body, but you have been in your past lives a donkey, an elephant, a bug, a beetle." Caterpillars could see all that, his previous lives. Then he saw the last time he had been a human. And Rishi Vyas asked him to pause and look at himself closely and vigilantly. At that lifetime, he was head of a large religious organization. He was highly educated, a great author, a famous teacher. And he taught a vast range of subjects. But himself, he did not believe in whatever he taught. For him, knowledge meant the skill to guide and lead others, or to gain power over others. He was convinced that nobody was as intelligent as he was. And he was further convinced that all of his followers were ignorant and gullible. But the preservation and the translation of the scriptures was an integral part of his professional life. So he built a big institution, lived a life of luxury. He justified the admirers he gathered around himself. But deep in his heart, he knew his attitude toward his followers was wrong. He also knew he was living the life of a hypocrite, and that hypocrisy is the most destructive force in spiritual life. Although he knew he was working against his conscience, but through his intellect, he justified himself with those actions. When he approached the old age, the cloud of regret began to have overcome over him. By the time he was too weak to really work with his conscience. Couldn't change his habits because they were too strong. His attachment to the appearances, his attachment to the power he gained, or the organization he made was too strong. So as he aged, his memory for details began to fade. He was left with the major themes of his thoughts, feeling, opinions, and self-image. So constantly he was preoccupied with memories of the inner conflict. His conscience was shouting that he had wasted the gift of his intellectual power. And he has given in the charms and temptations of the world. He had invested his power of discrimination very poorly. And when he was taking his last breath, that's what he saw, that a dense darkness descended, erasing every detail of his self-image and self-understanding, except that he was an opportunist who, like a chameleon, changed his colors in order to accomplish his goals. Then he was born as a chameleon. And this story is a representation of the saga of our own lives. We often perform actions without a clear understanding of their meaning and purpose. That's why through these scriptures, these rishis, they're opening our eyes. Because otherwise our actions are normally a mixture of good and bad, auspicious and inauspicious, virtuous and non-virtuous. And that's why we lead to both pleasant and unpleasant, desirable and undesirable consequences. When we are humans, we have a hunger for power and prestige, honor and dignity. And we don't mind doing the wrong actions. So mixed flavors. So consequently, even when he was a caterpillar, a great sage like Vyasa walked into his life. So there were some meritorious actions also. And as soon as the caterpillar realized his follies and weaknesses, Vyas blessed him further. I leave you here with the caterpillar's instinct. Use your instinct to protect and feed yourself. From now on, I will accompany you in spirit. So that was the outcome of his good karmas also. He said, you will no longer have the pain that accompanies birth and death, and you will return and retain the memory of today's experience. At some point, you will be born as a human with near perfect knowledge and wisdom. As soon as you share that wisdom with a seeker named Nand Bhadra, you will attain complete freedom from the cycle of birth and death. See, these yogis, these avatars, they are called Trikaldarshi. So Rishi Vyas could see his past, could see his future, and obviously the present also. And he blessed him. This is called a divine grace, which is another name for the kind of a blessing which, according to the scriptures, descends into our lives as a means of enabling us to attain ultimate freedom. But we should not ignore the role of self-effort, purushartha. So as part of our spiritual practice, it is important we constantly remind ourselves that even the most pleasant experiences are accompanied by some degree of pain, and that we use this reminder skillfully to face a bitter reality. Without the complete knowledge of our core being, life and everything that comes with it is pain. And that is the subject of the next sutra. And this is a sutra number 15. See, we need to learn this philosophy. This is a very deep philosophy. Philosophy is the backbone for practice. If we just keep on doing practice, without having this deep knowledge, it will not take us far. The yoga philosophy helps us understand our unique nature, our goal and purpose of life. It really gives us a very clear answers to fundamental questions like, what is a human being? What is the meaning and purpose of life? How do my body, mind, and consciousness relate to each other? Is there a way of living in this world happily and joyfully? That's how we really expand our practice. Our practice expands in proportion to our knowledge of yoga. If we have a limited knowledge, then limited practice. If we expand the knowledge, practice expands too. So that's why studying these sutras deeply is very important for a serious student. Let's look at verse number 15. Parinama, tap, sanskar, duhkhair, gunna, vritti, virodhac, duhkham eva sarvam vivekinah. Parinama, that means result or the effect. Tap, heat, scorching. Sanskar, subtle impressions of actions or residue of actions. Sanskar. Duhkhair, that is grief, pain, sorrow, duhkhair. So the result of action is full of pain. The action is full of pain. And the residue of action is full of pain. So parinama also, tapa also, sanskara also, duhkhair, all three of them. Gunna. Gun means the intrinsic attribute of this primordial nature. Simply, it's called sattva, rajas, tamas. The three fundamental forces that motivate us to think, speak, and act. Or you can say that primordial force of matter and energy. Okay. Vritti, modifications. Virodhac, contradiction. Cha means and. So together, this part, gun, vritti, virodhac means because of the opposing nature of the three primordial forces and the thought constructs they engender. Okay, so gun, vritti, virodhac. Duhkham, pain, sorrow. Ev means definitely. Sarvam, all. Vivekinah, a person of right understanding. Or a person of discernment. So translation of this verse is verse number 15. Because the effect of an action is accompanied by pain, because the action itself is accompanied by the experience of pain, because the subtle impressions of action contain pain, and because the forces that motivate us to perform an action mutually contradict and oppose each other, to a person endowed with discrimination or discernment, all is pain. All is pain. It's very important to remember the ideas which are expressed in this verse. They have no meaning to those people who are established in the full knowledge, established in themselves, the soul. For them, it doesn't matter. Nothing is pain, because they identify themselves with the Atma, the bliss. And it has no meaning for those totally blind to it. So this sutra is meaningful only to a viveki, those with the power of discrimination, to understand the difference between good and bad, right and wrong, true happiness and mere pleasure. Remember that. It's almost like that example of the rope in the backyard. Doesn't matter to a person who is walking into a pitch dark backyard. Can't see it. And a person who knows how to turn the light on, to that person also, no effect on the mind, because knows that it's just a rope. Only the in-between. In-between. So there are several points over here. The first point Patanjali makes in this sutra is that because the result of every action is accompanied by pain, all is pain to a person endowed with discernment. Normally, our actions are goal-driven. We set a goal, we develop a strategy to achieve it, then we perform an action in attempt to accomplish the goal. This is what any sensible doer will do. But our wisdom fails when we do not realize that the result of our action is based on several factors. And some of these factors are known to us while others are not. Some are under our control while others are not. For example, the factors buried in the oblivion of the past walk into the present, and they influence the outcome of our current action, which we call prarabdha. And some factors may be related to the actions of others colliding with our actions, because we are not living in a vacuum. There are several other people in our life. And still other factors might be the effect of our carelessness, which will undermine the results of our actions. So that means even though we know that this action we are doing, and this should be the outcome, and all those factors are not in our hands, but we become attached to the fruits of our actions. We think that we worked hard and we should have the result accordingly. So this attachment causes us to suffer from the anxiety while we are performing our actions, and from disappointment when we do not reap the anticipated results. We get frustrated further. So actions accompanied by anxiety and results accompanied by frustration and disappointment are painful. That's what he's saying. And what happens? We create an impression on our mind. A painful impression, the sanskara. And the second point Patanjali is making in this sutra is that because action itself is accompanied by the experience of pain, all is pain to a viveki. To a significant extent, the idea of pain and pleasure is unique to each individual. But in the general, pain comes from dissatisfaction and pleasure comes from satisfaction. And those satisfaction, dissatisfaction, they are associated with the result of our actions. Because our experience tells us that the result is dependent on several factors in addition to our current action. But our lack of knowledge regarding all the factors, we should go back to Bhagavad Gita. What Krishna gave 5 factors there for every action, for the success or even the failure of those actions. 5 factors. So we should have that knowledge. If we want successful outcome to fill our mind, but we often have a doubt. And from doubt comes the fear. Fear makes us nervous. Nervousness compromises our inner stability. Our breathing becomes erratic, irregular. A yogi, simply by looking at us, will find out we are trembling deep within. And it is because of the attachment to the result of action. We even hate those people who can be the threat to the outcome of our action. And those kind of emotions, they bring new sanskars then. Then these new actions are accompanied by anger, greed, and animosity. Not only they produce their negative results, but also contaminate the result of the original actions. So seen from the vantage point of discernment, all of this is painful. Ordinary person will say, so what? But a Viveki says, no, this is not right. So both the result of actions and the actions themselves, all accompanied by pain. So Rishi Patanjali moved to a third point in this verse. Because the subtle impressions of actions contain pain, all is pain to a person endowed with discernment. If we are not careful, both our actions as well as the results become contaminated by attachment and aversion. And this leads to a next level of contamination in our mind. Anger, jealousy, greed, doubt, fear, violence. But we continue walking on the path of action. And we keep on creating more impressions in the mind. Mind which is already filled with the negativities. These impressions in turn motivate us to undertake similar actions. So it's almost like if we get caught in a vicious cycle. Action to impression and impression to action. These impressions become powerful because we are reinforcing them. Eventually, they become so powerful, they begin to dictate how we act. And this is what yogis called it, a karma chakra. The wheel of karma, rotating at a seemingly unstoppable velocity. And there's another point Patanjali is making in this verse. That is the final and the most important point. He says, because the forces that motivate us to perform actions mutually contradict and oppose each other, all is pain to a person endowed with discernment. This is the last part. The fundamental force motivating us to perform our actions is known as a gunna. That is a quality or a characteristics, attribute, defining factor. That's a gunna. So in the context of spirituality in general and yoga in particular, gunna means essence also, fundamental force also, or the primordial energy also. But it does have three distinct colors: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is the quality of illumination, clarity. That is sattva. Rajas is the power of changeability, action. And tamas is darkness, heaviness, inertia. The property of energy that blocks the view of truth. That is tamas. So these three forces pervade everything that exists, including our mind and its functions and behaviors. Everything in the universe is simultaneously sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. Each of us has a mind filled with these forces. These forces influence the functions and behaviors of our mind. When sattvic forces dominate our mind, we gravitate towards sattvic thoughts. When rajasic or tamasic forces dominate, we become interested in attending rajasic or tamasic thoughts. It is important to remember that when one force dominates, the other are not cancelled. That also we learned from Bhagavad Gita. See, Yog Sutras and Bhagavad Gita They really complement each other. There's a lot of detail given in Bhagavad Gita. And in Yog Sutras, Rishi Patanjali assumes that we know all that. But for some new students, I'm just going a little bit in detail because the sutras are very deep. So these forces coexist, and through their coexistence, they play an unending game of supporting, opposing, and negating each other. It's almost like three boxers. One is on the top and the other two down. The goal of yoga sadhana is to make an effort to nurture and strengthen the function of the sattvic force so that there's more and more clarity, so that spontaneously and effortlessly we can perform our actions correctly. Because we will reap the fruit of our actions. When we do the actions wisely, those actions will be, we can do them positively. When we are already in the firm grip of the subtle impressions of our past actions, the starting point, nurturing sattvic forces, sometimes can be difficult. Because if there's a predominance of tamsikta or even rajsikta, changing into sattvikta would be difficult. But if we remember the first 3 points that Patanjali makes in this sutra, it becomes a little easier. That's why I have broken it down into the 4 parts of this verse. If we perform our actions without either attachment or aversion, we can accomplish the goal, which is freedom from all miseries. Attachment or aversion, do the actions for the sake of doing the actions. Do not get attached to the fruits. Because getting attached to the fruit, or even getting attached to the action itself, gives us the misery. So a careful analysis of the first 3 points, clearly telling us that attachment to the results of our actions and aversion to anything that poses an obstacle, the results are the true sources of misery. And nobody wants to be miserable. Nobody. Even a little bug doesn't want to be miserable, and here we are human beings with such a great intellect. So if we follow these, what he is telling us, there could be less and less misery. Let me just read it again. I find this verse so powerful. It can really open our eyes. It can change the direction of our life. Because the effect of an action is accompanied by pain, because the action itself is accompanied by the experience of pain, because the subtle impressions of action contain pain, and because the forces that motivate us to perform an action mutually contradict and oppose each other, to a person endowed with discernment, all is pain. So this is not, he's talking about pessimistically. He's just giving the right report to us if we want to change the direction of our life. And direction of life will be changed if we change our thoughts also. So the thoughts got to be changed. The color of our thoughts, the direction of our thoughts. So let's stop it here. And if you have any question, we can talk about it. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.